I'm your host, Jeff Sart. We're going to take you behind the scenes with the craft distillers who are pouring their heart and soul into crafting the next version of America's spirit. This is the Great American Whiskey Cookers. In this episode, Pat Hoffmann of Lonely Oak Distillery tells us about his journey into learning to like rye and subsequently making his sweet mash rye. It has turned many from not being a rye guy into a rye whiskey lover. Sometimes you just have to find the right rye. Watch the episode. Welcome to this edition of the Great American Whiskey Cookers. I am here in Erling, Iowa at Lonely Oak Distillery. I'm talking with Pat Hoffmann. We're talking whiskey, we're talking rye, we're talking all sorts of stuff. Before we get into all that, like us on the socials, Facebook, you can go to our website, of course, and step it up, go to Patreon, show us some love, become a member. You never know what you might find. So, Pat, we're talking whiskey, we're talking rye.
Yes.
Right? So, your rye whiskey, how long have you been making it?
5 years now. 4.5 years.
Okay.
Our rye.
That's your plan.
Right. I mean, I was obvious. This is how we started making rye. It took me a while to like rye until I came to figure out that almost all the ryes are the same. They're almost all 95.5.
Yep.
Or 100% rye.
Right.
Why is that? Well, because one of the biggest distilleries in Indiana, that I'm not going to say their name, that's what they made.
Yep, 95.5.
And then you have a craft distillery that buys that juice and sells it as their own. Nothing wrong with it, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
And sells it as their own until theirs is ready. But are they going to change the recipe?
Probably not.
Probably not, because otherwise it's going to taste different. Now you multiply that times 1,000 craft distilleries, and you got the world is awash with 95.5 rye.
Right.
Well,
And good
I didn't want to do that. I didn't
rye
want
is
to do
delicious.
that. I didn't want to do that. And I'm not saying it's not bad. I wanted mine to be different. I wanted mine to be individual. So I went to a good friend of mine. I didn't like rye, so I went to a good friend of mine that owns a liquor store in Omaha, and I said, set me up. I said, I can't make rye if I don't like how rye tastes.
Right.
And so he set me up with a few different rye, probably a case of ryes. And I went home, and I'm like, all of a sudden I had 2 or 3 that stuck out. And then started doing some internet sleuthing, and I find out that all of these are high rye, have corn in the mash bill.
Okay.
And so that's how we went about developing our rye. And I'm sitting and I'm doing this over time.
Yeah.
You know, and you start and you stop, you start and stop. So I'm sitting with a friend of mine in the bar in Erling. And we're drinking our Steeple Ridge, and he's like, when are you going to start making rye? And I'm like, I don't know. I said, I finally figured it out, and I need to start doing that. And he's like, well, I've got 6 bags, super sacks of rye in my shed right now. And if I don't do something with it, it's going to go bad, because I never got it planted because we got an early winter. And I'm like, so I said, is it ready to go? He's like, yeah. I said, okay, just let me know when you want to bring it over and we'll start making rye. The next morning, he was backing up, unloaded 6. We unloaded it. And then the following day is when we started making our rye whiskey. Well, I had everything done. I knew my recipe. I knew how I was going to do it. But it was just like, I mean, I was honestly thinking, well, we'll do a year. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I grew it, it would be another 1.5 years, right? Before we start to make it. So it was like, all right, I know the guy. So we sourced the rye, not the whiskey, but we got that rye for him from Defiance, Iowa. Just
Okay.
down the road. So,
Yeah.
Yep. So it's kind of cool. So yeah.
And now it's a regular offering that you have.
Yes, it is. Yes, we call it our sweet mash rye. It's won several different awards. The North American Bourbon and Whiskey Competition, it's wonderful. It was named one of the top 10 whiskeys in the country out of that competition. And there's a picture of it. It's got 2 Wellers, me, I'm probably not supposed to say those names.
No,
Right?
say it.
So, okay, it's got 2 Wellers, it's got me, it's got Steeple Ridge. I mean, all these big name whiskeys, and then there's a bottle of Steeple Ridge whiskey, and I'm sure everybody is like, oh yeah, I recognize that bottle, that bottle. Like, what the hell is this? Steeple Ridge Sweet Mash Rye. And so it's newer than our bourbon for the simple fact that I had to learn to like rye. And I mean, how do you make rye whiskey when to you all rye whiskey sucks?
Right.
Well, this sucks just as bad as the other stuff I've been drinking, right? So it's like, so you have to take the time to learn, to acquire a taste, know what your flavor is. And that's what's great about whiskey, is not what you like.
Right.
What sucks to you
might not.
might be my favorite. Yeah. I always have that's the one whiskey competition we entered, and I can't remember if it was bourbon or rye, but we were one of the highest scorers in the competition, and they give you your results. And for this competition, there were 7 judges, and they throw out the high, and they throw out the low, and then they average the 5 that remained. One guy gave me a 99, which, well, I don't know. I mean, is there only one whiskey in the whole world that's 1% better than mine? I'm like, I don't know. That's pretty high. And then another guy gave me a 51. Well, you get 50 just for entering. You get 50 for entering. So one guy, and these are whiskey guys, one guy thought it was probably the best whiskey he ever had. And so he gave it a ridiculous high score. And one guy thought it was probably the worst whiskey he ever had, because he had to give me 50 just for entering. So he gave me 1, give me 1%. And, but then we ended up averaging like 93. So 6 of the 7 loved it. One guy absolutely hated it. Now, does that mean it's good or it's bad? It's subjective. If I was that one guy, I wouldn't say, well, I would say, no, you 6 are wrong and I'm right.
Right.
But that's the wonderful thing about whiskey.
So are all your fields around you?
No, we have right here where we are. This is 200 acres right here. So we got 160 on this side, and then our vodka's called North 40. That's our North 40 right across the road. So
that makes sense. I get it.
And so, and then we have 400 acres that we farm that is just north, kind of between here and Panama, Iowa. It's mostly along Highway 191.
Oh, so okay, all right. And is that all corn?
No, corn and soybeans.
Okay.
And then we have distillery corn. We grow, it changes every year, but right around 10 to 20 acres every year is what we do. Up to 30 sometimes.
All right.
So when somebody comes into our tasting room, and it never fails. If you got 4 or 5 guys in there, and we'll start sampling, and one of them will say, no, I'm not a rye guy. And my first thing is, well, then you're going to try my rye. I never let them walk away without it, because I was that way. I'm not a rye guy. But you buy the same rye either from the same maker or with the same recipe from 100 different bottles, and you expect it all to be different.
Right.
And
it's the same.
And it's not. It's I always, like I said, I always say the rye. The world is awash in 95.5 rye, and people don't know it. I mean, I like to take distillery tours because I like to see what other people do. I like to, and I want to differentiate myself. I'm pretty much an open book, but I've been to distillery tours where they tell me, oh yeah, this is how we make it, this is where we make it. They take me to the whole thing, and they've made it and they've done it all, and I'm sitting in Kansas City, Missouri, and I buy my bottle at the end of the tour, and I turn it over and it says distilled in Indiana.
Right.
And so it's like I'm not going to be that guy.
That's
I'm not. What you see is what you get.
Pat, thank you for the conversation on the rye. This was so much fun. I can't wait to taste it. I'm so looking forward to this. Where do they find you? How do they get in contact with you? And where do they find your whiskey?
Well, you can reach out to us at lonelyoakdistillery.com. All the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Lonely Oak Distillery.
Okay.
You'll find us on the shelves in Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Colorado, throughout the whole Midwest.
Fantastic. I'm Jeff for the Great American Whiskey Cookers. Hey, we hope you've enjoyed this. Pick up a bottle of Lonely Oak, Steeple Ridge, Sweet Mash Rye. I'm telling you what, I think you're gonna like it from what Pat's been telling me. Until next time, if you can't be good at it. See ya.
It's subjective. You know, if I was that one guy, I wouldn't say, well, you know, if I would say, no, you six are wrong and I'm right.
Right.
But you know, that's the wonderful thing about whiskey.
Well, and it's funny you bring it up because the big human was not a rye guy. And he used to tell me this all the time. So I'm not a rye because I'd always tried to get him. So I tricked him one day and I put a rye in front of him. I said, try this. And he said, oh, this is really good. What is this? It's a rye.